Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. In the lead up to the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Party Congress, we have a series of conversations with experts to help us understand China in the world. Today, we're so pleased to have with us Randy Schreiber, Chairman of Project 2049 Institute and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs from 2017 to 2019. Randy is a familiar face in the region and Taiwan because of his 3 decades of involvement in defense policymaking from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Randy, you've been one of the most knowledgeable U.S. policymakers when it comes to security and the Taiwan Strait. Tell us how Taiwan factors into the current U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy and perhaps its evolution over the last 3 decades.
Taiwan is really key to the U.S. strategy, and I think its importance has been growing. You know, it wasn't long ago when Taiwan was viewed mostly in the context of how it affected the greater U.S. China relationship. But I think the trade relationship has grown to the point where it's a significant factor. Taiwan is the U.S.'s 8th largest trading partner. Of course, we all know in certain sectors, for example, semiconductors, how critical Taiwan is. But also as a like-minded regional and global citizen, we all are appreciative of Taiwan's contributions to assist Ukrainian refugees in Poland, for example. And then finally, Taiwan's strategic geography. If you look at all the contested areas and areas of interest of the United States, whether that be the East China Sea and Taiwan's proximity to the Miyako Strait and the Ryukyu Island chain and the disputed areas of the Senkakus or Diaoyutai Islands. If you look at the South China Sea, where Taiwan is a claimant itself, but also adjacent to those disputed waters. Or if you look out to the second island chain, where Taiwan maintains 4 of its diplomatic relationships, also a contested area. So Taiwan's geography is of strategic importance, and Taiwan having a population and a government that is so like-minded on the free and open Indo-Pacific, it's factors directly into our Indo-Pacific strategy.
Well, I think Taiwan's importance, you're probably one of the earliest to recognize Taiwan's strategic importance. If it wasn't for, I would say, this growing awareness of the threats from China, would you say Washington, D.C. still attach such importance to Taiwan? Is it directly linked to U.S. China relations?
Well, no, I think the point I was trying to make is Taiwan has emerged as an important partner in and of itself. When you're a top 10 trading partner, for example, and Taiwan ranks number 8 right now, that counts in our calculation no matter what. And mind you, our number 9 largest trading partner is India, a country of 1.3 billion people. So Taiwan, 23, 24 million people, is really punching well above its weight when it comes into our economic relationship. But if you look at so many other issues, look at the response to the pandemic, Taiwan has proven to be not only a model country in how it responded on behalf of its own citizens, but really a good regional global citizen when it came to contributing to the greater cause of trying to deal with this pandemic, in stark contrast, of course, to how the People's Republic of China responded.
Well, you know, it's taken a while, I would say, for Washington, D.C. to kind of have this recognition of the importance of Taiwan. And you serve in the Trump administration. Were instrumental in crafting and leading the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy, which really shifted the U.S. long-held policy toward China from a strategic partner to a strategic competitor. Was it hard to change the mindset in the Pentagon down to the service level?
Well, I think it's actually work that continues, particularly when you look at across the whole of government into other agencies. I think, for example, our economic and trade agencies may be lagging a bit behind still, and still are at least conflicted in terms of the approach to China. But look, I think it was an evolutionary process. I think there were those of us in the 90s that regarded China's military modernization with concern, with the coercion of Taiwan that dates back decades. And we saw it in a very acute way in 95, 96, culminating in the March 96 missile exercises. So it's been an evolutionary process where minds have been changed over time. And of course, the biggest factor of all has been Chinese behavior and the more assertive and aggressive positions China is taking in the region. So I think we're at a point now where there is a consensus and a center of gravity. It took time, but I think the greatest accelerant of all has been Chinese assertive behavior over the last few years, and that really has tipped the balance.
Well, Chinese behavior, as you said, is a major factor in changing the dynamics. But there's also a growing debate in Taiwan whether Taiwan's security is truly a key national interest to the United States. And this debate has led to the question, how much can and should Taiwan rely on the U.S. and what Taiwan needs to do to defend itself? What is your view?
Well, first and foremost, Taiwan is responsible for its own defense, and I think Taiwan should take that obligation very seriously and all that that entails, including making the appropriate investments in defense needs. But look, it's in our law that Taiwan's well-being is in our interest. It says in the Taiwan Relations Act, any threat to Taiwan, including economic threat, is of grave concern to the United States and the region. But it goes well beyond law. It's really in our interests. And if you need any proof, look at how the U.S. has always responded, whether that was 1950 and sending in the 7th Fleet, whether that was 57, 58, the offshore island shelling campaign where the United States provided logistic support, whether that's 1996, as I mentioned, sending the 2 carriers to the Taiwan Strait around the time of that missile exercise. I think we have a track record of supporting Taiwan, and I think our interests favor that. We have a president who has said not once, twice, 3, or now 4 times that we will
4 times
defend Taiwan. So I know for countries that are dependent on outside powers for their own security, there's always a little bit of anxiety about will that support be there when we need it most. But I think the United States interests, our law, our track record, increasing regional support, including friends like Japan. I think all of this weighs in the favor of the United States doing something to support Taiwan if it finds itself in that kind of position.
I'm going to follow up on your mentioning of President Biden's 4 times saying the U.S. will intervene militarily. Your thought, do you believe the U.S. will do so? And if you were to return to the government again in the policymaking position, will you commit that the U.S. will intervene militarily should China invade Taiwan?
Well, even if I return to government, that would be the prerogative of the president and the Congress. So I'll leave my own role out of this. I think you have to take the president at his word, and any of us can misspeak once or twice. I don't think 4 times is an accident, and he's certainly somebody with a personal history here. He was in the Senate when the Taiwan Relations Act was passed and voted for it. So you have to take him at his word, and so I think there is a commitment there. Now,
so then why did the White House walk back every time when he said that?
I think what the White House has said is there's no change to our One China policy. And at its core, that's true. We have a diplomatic relationship with Beijing and the People's Republic of China. We don't have a formal diplomatic partnership or alliance with Taiwan. That remains unchanged. But in a way, the One China policy, the degree of clarity or ambiguity, all of that has always been dynamic. And so I think the White House is probably trying to adapt to where the president clearly believes our policy is. But I again, take everybody at their word. I think the core of the One China policy is intact, although certainly its significance has been diminished over time. Again, given China's behavior, our One China policy was always predicated on reciprocal commitments, including China's commitment to fundamentally approach the Taiwan Strait with peaceful intentions and actions.
And how would you say China's intention and ultimate goal regarding Taiwan has changed or not over the last few years? It seems that the aggression is perhaps some indication that China is getting anxious about Taiwan. Do you think is it still unification at all costs? And is Xi Jinping under any pressure to do so before he leaves the office, meaning maybe in 5 or 10 years? We've seen different deadlines mentioned in the media. And what is your view on that?
The CCP has been very clear that its goal is what they call reunification or unification. I do believe their hope is they can still win without fighting. Of course, the problem is their tactics to prevent quote unquote independence are coercive in nature, military tools and the like. And those are precisely the kinds of approaches that lose hearts and minds and lose support for an eventual reconciliation under some kind of one China framework. So efforts to prevent independence that the CCP has felt are necessary are precisely the actions that are driving Taiwanese people to the idea of some kind of separateness over time. So this is a real problem. The Chinese haven't figured out how to get out of that cul-de-sac, so to speak. I do think ultimately they understand that conflict and war would be extraordinarily costly, even if successful. And so there is some level of commitment to trying to win without fighting. Does Xi Jinping have unlimited patience? Probably not. So I think it's even more important now to have a strong deterrent capability and support in the international community for Taiwan to continue to exist in its current status or better. And I think that exists in the United States, Japan, I think elsewhere as well.
Do you believe there's some deadline within the CCP?
I don't. When Hong Kong was going to revert, they had a clock in Tiananmen Square counting down to the very second. And that was, of course, a product of the 1984 joint declaration with Great Britain that gave us the date, July 1st, 1997. I don't think that exists in the case of Taiwan. There might be some greater sense of urgency on the part of Xi Jinping in that his own rhetoric seems to box him in a bit to doing something and quote, not passing it to the next generation. But I think because they need to have greater levels of confidence in their military capability, because they're still working to drive a wedge between the United States and Japan and Taiwan, because they still believe that they can win over some constituency in Taiwan for, if not unification, at least sapping the will to fight. So I think for all these reasons, there's probably not a precise deadline in mind.
Well, does that mean do you think that China or Beijing still hopes a dialogue or some kind of talk would be possible with Taiwan?
Well, clearly they're still talking to the opposition party. So my hope is that they would find a way to talk to the duly elected governing officials and talk to Tsai Ing-wen. Obviously, there was a meeting with the last president, Ma Ying-jeou. So it is, in the realm of the possible that there's a future meeting between the CCP leadership and elected authorities in Taiwan. It doesn't appear that they're willing to make that compromise with the current TPP government. I think their preconditions are unreasonable and shouldn't carry any expectation of success. There's, I think, very little, if no chance that President Tsai will accept the 92 consensus. She's been very clear about that. But yes, I think in some way the calculation is they'll find a way to get back to dialogue. And I hope that's the case, but I hope it's without preconditions as an equal party at the table.
Yeah, if the criteria to bring both parties back to the table cannot be met, what would be some of the key factors in China's decision-making in terms of whether it's really going to make the move, meaning some kind of attack of Taiwan? And how would that look like?
Well, we know what's in the anti-secession law. So they've said there's certain criteria that where they feel they would be compelled to use force. A de jure declaration of independence. I think it mentions Taiwan's pursuit of weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons, foreign forces on Taiwan. So we have to understand what is in their law and what they've rhetorically at least committed to.
So would you say these are the hard red lines that the U.S. would probably agree as well?
Well, I don't like to use red lines, particularly when I'm in no position to enforce them or honor them. I'm not a government. I do think it's important that we understand what's in their law and what they're, even though it's not a country bound by the rule of law, that is a signaling to us and to others of what they regard as very serious moves. I think there's another thing that's hard to measure, which would be at what point do they decide their approach cannot succeed? They're clearly driving hearts and minds away in Taiwan. They're clearly inciting a will on the part of other countries to be involved in supporting Taiwan. You know, at some point, does Xi Jinping say, you know what, this peaceful approach backed by coercive tactics is just not going to work? At that point, they still would have to have the level of confidence that their military can pull it off. Taiwan is a hard target, 100 nautical miles of water, mountainous, inhospitable terrain, unfavorable sea conditions for much of the year, very few good places for embarkation for amphibious assault. So it's a hard target, and this is a PLA that hasn't seen combat since 1979. Mm-hmm. So they'd have to have some level of confidence they can succeed. So what would it look like? I'm of the view that anything short of an invasion doesn't work to achieve their political objectives. You know, taking an offshore island or a limited attack or even some kind of blockade. I don't believe Taiwan capitulates and comes to some political settlement. And so that's really a problem. That things short of an invasion probably don't reach their political goals. So that really puts a added element of risk into this whole thing. So again, keeping them in a place where they don't have the confidence they can succeed militarily will be very important.
Well, clearly, Taiwan Strait is now a global risk. We've seen that, you know, from Quad to NATO, Taiwan is on everyone's mind. So how do you feel about this new development? And in addition, you know, there's also the semiconductor industry. The world recognizes that the concentration of semiconductor manufacturing technology in Taiwan may not be the safest for the world. But President Tsai also said that shouldn't be a risk factor. And your view on all of this?
Well, we can debate whether or not it's a good idea, but the fact of the matter is that's where we are. And to alter that landscape is not done cheaply or easily. So Taiwan will be the center of the global supply chain for semiconductors for as far as my eyes can see. I think all the things I mentioned about U.S. interests and support for Taiwan apply to other Western-oriented countries, like-minded countries. All the concerns about China's behavior are there. So I think as we've grown to appreciate the importance of Taiwan, so have others. I was in Europe not long ago, and it's clear that their anxiety
after the war, after the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yes, I was going to say it's clear that the anxiety level about China is increased, and you know, frankly, it's not about in Europe. It's not about concentration camps in Xinjiang. It's not about excessive illegal claims in the South China Sea or East China Sea, and unfortunately, it's not even about applying pressure and coercion directed at Taiwan. It's China's backing of Russia in the war in Ukraine has really got Europeans concerned. And so similar to what I said before about how U.S. interests have evolved, China's own behavior, its own assertiveness, its own strategic choices are driving a coalition of very powerful, capable, like-minded countries together And in many ways, that involves supporting Taiwan.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us to speak to our audience. And of course, for your long-term commitment to the peace and security of Taiwan Strait and the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you again. So take good care.
My pleasure.
Okay.